Project Baltimore combed through scores at all 150 city schools where the state math test was given. We found in 23 Baltimore city schools, there were 0 students who tested proficient in math. Not a single student.
You did not just mishear that. This is not an exaggeration. This isn't a situation where I'm doing clickbait or there's a misleading headline or anything like that. In fact, talking about how 23 schools in Baltimore's K-12 system had 0 students proficient in math as determined by the statewide standard tests that went out to all different grade levels undersells the problem, because there are significantly more schools in Baltimore that actually feature only 1 or 2 students who are proficient, meaning at grade level, in mathematics. This is an absolutely tragic story, and we're going to get into it. But before we do that, this video is sponsored, so I'm going to toss it to the sponsor, but you definitely want to come back on the other side to hear how bad our public education system actually is. Are you struggling with your holiday weight? Well, guess what? You're not alone. Over 52% of Americans have weight loss as a goal for their New Year's resolution, so you're in a boat with over half the adults in this country. And one of the best ways to fight off holiday weight is this amazing powder over at ketowithjustice.com. This helps elevate ketones, suppress appetite and cravings so that you can meet your weight loss goals. And in honor of the fact that we're all trying to lose that holiday weight, you can get this for 51% off this month as our holiday weight discount. That's ketowithjustice.com, 60-day money-back guarantee, ketowithjustice.com. Now, my brother initially sent me this story, but while I was working on this video, I actually stumbled upon a video from a black conservative's perspective, and I've mentioned him a few times recently. He did an excellent video on this. I suggest you watch it and just inform yourself about what's going on in our public schools, and specifically what's going on in certain public school districts like Baltimore, because it's absolutely ridiculous. In fact, I remember last year I did a story on a student who had what I said was a 1.3 GPA and was in the top half of students in his high school despite being left back each and every year and being in the 9th grade. But that story was even worse than I thought. I thought 1.3 GPA, that's crazy that gets you in the top half of your school. But when I looked at the story and was corrected by people in the comments, I discovered that it was actually a 0.13 GPA. So not even a solid 1 got you in the top of the class in that particular Baltimore high school. But now we know why, because it turns out in 23 schools across the city, being proficient in math is just unachievable.
I see the brightness of Baltimore kids.
It's now been more than a year.
We're not living up to our potential.
Since Giovanni Patterson made national headlines by suing Baltimore City schools for failing to properly educate generations of students.
We, the taxpayer, are funding our own demise.
Now, I love Giovanni Patterson's spirit. When you're in a city as corrupt as Baltimore, you have to take extraordinary means to get reasonable results from public services. So him suing the Baltimore public school system over a year ago for failing to adequately educate a generation of students, I'm totally on board with in spirit. That being said, it has not been the wake-up call I'm sure he was hoping for, because again, we're dealing with 23 public schools that are K through 12 that feature no students doing math at grade level.
Patterson was born here. He has seen the failures firsthand. But what Project Baltimore just told him at first rendered him speechless.
My immediate reaction is take your kids out of these schools.
Just think about how crazy that is. And by the way, credit to this Fox local affiliate for doing this Project Baltimore series. We're probably going to have to do a deep dive into other episodes in the series. But this guy thought that the Baltimore public school system was so bad for so long that he filed a lawsuit against them. And then when he's informed exactly how bad it was in this recent thing, he's still stunned into silence. So the guy who's notable for saying, wow, Baltimore public schools are so terrible, I need to sue over it, is shocked by how terrible they are still becoming or still getting.
The Maryland State Department of Education has released the 2022 state test results, known as MCAP, Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program. Baltimore City's math scores were the lowest in the state. Just 7% of 3rd through 8th graders tested proficient in math. That means 93% could not do math at grade level. But that's not all we found. Project Baltimore combed through scores at all 150 city schools where the state math test was given. We found in 23 Baltimore city schools, there were 0 students who tested proficient in math.
Now, they give you the bigger breakdown right there, and as you can see, this is not an issue of 23 Baltimore public schools that are just the worst of the worst. 93% of the students who took this statewide test for the whole school district cannot do math. They are 7% proficient, the lowest in the state, and an absolutely embarrassing number for the country. In fact, the only people who are not embarrassed by this are the students of the Baltimore public school system because they're not proficient in math at a 93% clip.
Absolutely. It just sounds like these schools now have turned into essentially babysitters with no accountability.
So I'm going to have to do a hard disagree with him right there because babysitters can actually be fired. Unfortunately, the teachers' unions completely run the show in the Baltimore public school system, and all they care about is their own personal job security for their union members, and obviously not caring about providing an adequate education to the students of Baltimore.
This is the future of our city. We got to change this.
It's unbelievable because I'm looking at this man who, again, is known for being the guy who says Baltimore public schools are so bad I have to sue over them, and I can actually see the distress and defeat on his face. This is horrible. Even the guy who made his name talking about how bad these schools are is just utterly crushed by the fact of how bad the schools are.
Among the list of 23 schools, here's how the numbers break down. 10 of them are high schools. 8 are elementary schools, 3 are middle high schools, and 2 are elementary middle schools. Exactly 2,000 students in total took the state math test at these schools, and not one could do math.
They couldn't even get one student out of 2,000. And as you noticed, this is not a problem in their kindergarten system. This is not a problem in their middle school system. This is not a problem in their high school system. At every level, they are failing these students. Almost a perfectly even distribution of the failures when you figure out that they have these combined middle and high schools, combined elementary and middle schools. Every single level, they're just failing. 2,000 kids, you can't get one student to pass. And I know that the students in Baltimore don't understand how devastating a ratio that is because they can't do math, because they go to Baltimore public schools. But I assure you, that is not very good.
The largest investment in public education by any governor in our state's history.
Governor Wes Moore, last week, in his first State of the State address, made his feelings about public education clear. It's one of his top priorities.
We can no longer separate our vision for economic prosperity from the duty to make Maryland's public schools the best in the nation.
So the problem is that education spending is always the number one priority of every state budget. This is why when you combine education, which is mostly spent on the local level, with the federal Department of Education, you get a total that actually surpasses the military budget. The United States drops about $1.2 trillion on the public school system throughout the country each and every year. And in Baltimore, they drop $21,000 per pupil in their education system at a rate of $1.6 billion annually. On top of that, and this is absolutely crucial, the per pupil number is based on an attendance figure that is actually conducted at the beginning of the school year. A bunch of these students cut out of class, they stop going, so they're not actually in the schools, so the per pupil rate is actually higher due to the heavy truancy problem that they experience in Baltimore. But that's a lot of money. That should be well beyond what you need to educate a student for a year, and yet all we hear about is how they need more money and disadvantage and blah, blah, blah. That is not the issue. All this money is going to keep people in jobs that are protected in perpetuity, that have pensions and healthcare, which is great for them, but clearly and obviously that is not benefiting the students. In fact, I would explain these numbers in simpler details, but the thing is, a lot of people who might be interested in this video locally might have went to Baltimore public schools, so they don't understand how you divide a number of students by a dollar amount spent, and that gets you to $21,000 per student. Because if I haven't mentioned this enough times in this video, Baltimore students cannot do math.
After his State of the State address, Project Baltimore reached out to Moore's office, asking to speak with him about his plan to improve education. Before becoming governor, Moore lived in Baltimore. We wanted to ask him how he plans to help city students, especially those who attend these 23 schools. Governor Moore's office did not respond.
So this guy's from Baltimore. He's made education his number one priority. He is a part of that machine, or he at least should be aware of that machine, and yet he couldn't comment specifically on this, even though in his first State of the State speech, he couldn't stop talking about how education's his number one priority. Well, let's talk about your area, where you lived, where you came from, and the education there. No comment. Don't got time for that.
But city schools did send us a statement with steps it's taking to improve math scores, including professional development for teachers, summer learning, and an extended learning period at the end of the day.
Think about how absurd that is. They get reached out to by the news. They tell them, hey, 23 of your schools, 2,000 students, not one of them is at grade level in math. So the Baltimore City Public School System releases a statement, and included in there is professional development for teachers as a solution, i.e. they're going to teach the teachers how to teach, which, considering they're already math teachers, they should be good at. But, no accountability in our public school system ever. You can't fire anybody. So I guess that's what we have to deal with. That's the solution you're just going to have to eat if you're unfortunately the parents of 93% of the students in the school system who can't do math, or you send your kids to the school where none of the kids can do math.
The statement said, "We're confident these instructional strategies will help us regain the momentum and progress we experienced before the pandemic."
Also, I absolutely hate them using the pandemic as an excuse. Let us not forget, there was never any scientific basis for locking down the public schools. Countries in Europe did not lock down the public schools. It was shown to us time and time again that the public schools were not significant vectors of transmission. Kids, fortunately, did not get as sick as the elderly, and we knew at the time that we were going to lose a bunch of progress. So they're saying, oh, well, we're confident we're going to gain back what we lost during the pandemic, yet they're the ones who advocated for shutting everything down during the pandemic. That was a step they did not need to take. So just blaming the pandemic as if it's not because of the policies that you instituted as a political weapon against your opposition is absurd. They used the kids as props. They kept the schools closed. They were trying to maximize the harm of the lockdowns because they were more concerned about a presidential election. And now, a couple years later, when the school should have been open from the jump, they're still talking about how it's not their fault. Don't worry about it. Pandemic. How about some consequences for teachers? How about some consequences for the teachers' unions that fought tooth and nail to keep the schools closed because they prioritized the comfort of their members being able to teach from home over their students?
0%. What are you preparing these kids for? Are we expecting these kids to kill off themselves? I mean, we see the number of teen shootings happening just this year. What jobs are we preparing these kids for? That's the future.
He's 100% right. Baltimore schools are absolute failures, and it seems like everybody's job in the public school system is just to extract as much money as humanly possible from the state, from the taxpayer, and give it to their political cronies, and don't worry about this whole thing about educating people's kids.
Within the state testing data, we found 3 additional Baltimore City schools with 0 students proficient in math. One is a school for incarcerated youth. The other 2 are for students with disabilities. We did not include them in the list of 23 schools. It's also worth pointing out, we found an additional 20 schools that had just 1 or 2 students who were proficient in math.
So he closes this out by pointing out that they had 3 additional schools that they didn't include. 2 of them were for disabled kids. 1 was for incarcerated kids. To let you know that the 23 are normal, supposedly functional public schools where they had 0 students proficient in math. Then he talks about the 20 additional schools that only had 1 or 2 kids, and you realize it is so insane, and it's actually sensible that a student would have made the top half of his class with a .13 GPA. They have a 93% failure rate. This is embarrassing, and this is one of the reasons why I definitely 100% endorse charter schools. Parents need to be able to get their kids out of these schools, and it's absolutely crazy that they consistently vote for Democratic Party politicians when these same people, if you ever see the lines for the charter school lottery, will quite literally line up around the block for Republican policies. The Republican Party really needs to step up their messaging to Black Americans, specifically on the issue of education, because when you have people lining up to vote for the other side, but then they also line up for your policy proposals, something is misaligned there, and you definitely need to fix it. I always believed that if Republicans were going to win on one issue in particular, it wasn't going to be outcompeting the Democratic Party on soft on crime. It was going to be, hey, I'm sure you want your kids to go to good schools. Let us let you make the decision on what schools you send your kids to. 23, 0 proficient in math, 20 schools with 1 or 2 students proficient in math, 93% failure school district wide. It's insane. It shouldn't happen. $21,000 per student, $1.6 billion down the drain, and it's unforgivable. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social media. Support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute tragedy that is the Baltimore City Public Schools. Till next time.